The world stood still that day. Inside the church, where music once overflowed from D'Angelo's soul, silence now filled the air. Every seat was taken, every eye glistened with emotion, and every heartbeat seemed to echo the same question: how do you say goodbye to a man whose music never dies? Then, through the stillness, Angie Stone's son slowly stepped to the microphone. His hands trembled, his voice caught for a moment, and the crowd leaned in, bracing for what he was about to say. And when he finally spoke, the room broke. His words weren't rehearsed, polished, or staged. They came from a place deeper than grief. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a confession of love, forgiveness, and legacy that no one was prepared to hear. Those who knew D'Angelo personally wept openly, while strangers watching online felt as if they were mourning family. In that single, heartbreaking speech, Angie Stone's son didn't just honor the man, he revealed the soul behind the legend. What followed wasn't a performance or a eulogy, it was truth, raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Even now, fans around the world can't stop replaying that moment, calling it the most powerful tribute ever spoken. Because when words come from pain, they don't just touch hearts, they leave a mark that lasts forever. The day of D'Angelo's funeral felt like time itself had slowed down. A soft haze hung in the air outside the historic Richmond chapel, where hundreds gathered in quiet reverence. The sound of muffled sobs blended with faint chords of gospel music echoing through the hall. The same kind of soulful harmony that had defined D'Angelo's life and career. Inside, candles flickered beside framed photos of him performing, eyes closed, lost in his music, reminders of the passion that once set stages on fire. Among the crowd sat fellow artists, producers, and fans who had traveled across the country just to say goodbye. Legends like Erykah Badu, Maxwell, Questlove, and others filled the pews, their heads bowed, their hearts heavy. Everyone knew this wasn't just a farewell, it was the end of an era in soul music. Every note that played from the live band carried both sorrow and gratitude, as if the music itself was mourning the man who had given it life. Then, through the crowd, Angie Stone appeared graceful, composed, yet visibly holding back tears. For years, she had shared not only a bond of music with D'Angelo, but something far more personal, their son. He walked just behind her, tall and quiet, dressed in black, carrying the weight of both grief and legacy. To many, he was simply the child of two music legends. But to those who knew their history, he was the living bridge between love, loss, and art. As the ceremony progressed, people whispered that Angie and her son would speak. No one could have imagined, however, what would follow: that their words would not only honor D'Angelo's genius but also unveil the depth of their shared humanity. Because this wasn't just a public farewell to a music icon, it was a deeply personal goodbye to a father, a mentor, and a man whose spirit had touched every life in that room. To understand the weight of that day, you have to understand who D'Angelo truly was. Not just the musician, but the man behind the music. Born Michael Eugene Archer in Richmond, Virginia, he grew from a quiet church boy with a heavenly voice into a soul revolutionary who redefined an entire genre. His voice wasn't just smooth, it was spiritual, soaked in honesty, vulnerability, and pain. When he released Brown Sugar in 1995, it wasn't just an album, it was a cultural awakening. He brought the warmth of vintage soul into a modern world that had forgotten what real emotion sounded like. Every lyric, every note, every silence between the beats carried meaning. But with greatness came weight. As fame swallowed him whole, D'Angelo began to withdraw, retreating from the very spotlight he had once illuminated. The pressure to stay perfect, the expectations from fans and labels, the loneliness of stardom, it all carved into him, leaving scars that the public never saw. Behind the smooth melodies was a man battling his own demons, addiction, heartbreak, and the burden of being misunderstood. He disappeared from the public eye for years, leaving fans to wonder if the man who gave soul a heartbeat had been silenced forever. Yet, like true artists do, D'Angelo found his redemption in music. When he returned with Black Messiah, his voice carried new weight, older, deeper, wiser. It wasn't just a comeback, it was resurrection. He sang not for fame, but for truth, channeling pain into purpose. That same truth lived in the people who loved him most, none more so than Angie Stone, the woman who had walked beside him during his most defining years. Their relationship wasn't easy. It was a fusion of passion and struggle, two musical souls trying to build harmony while living inside chaos. But through it all, they shared something that outlasted every heartbreak: their son. He inherited his father's musical ear and his mother's emotional depth, embodying both their legacies in one heartbeat. That's why, when he stood at D'Angelo's funeral, it wasn't just as a grieving son, it was as a reflection of everything D'Angelo had lived, loved, and left behind. Through him, both his parents' stories converged, one of rhythm, resilience, and redemption. And in that truth, everyone in the room could feel it. D'Angelo's legacy wasn't gone, it was still singing through the bloodline of soul he left behind. When the moment finally came for Angie Stone's son to take the stage, the entire room fell into a heavy, reverent silence. The soft hum of the organ faded, and all that remained was the sound of quiet breathing and muffled tears. He walked slowly toward the podium, his head slightly bowed, his eyes red but steady. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't going to be just another eulogy. This was something deeper, something sacred. As he reached the microphone, he took a long breath, looked out over the crowd, and whispered, "I never thought I'd have to say goodbye to my dad like this." His voice cracked, and the first wave of emotion rippled through the audience. You could see Angie, sitting in the front row, clutching a handkerchief, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son channel both her strengths and D'Angelo's soul. He began to speak about his father, not as a legend, not as a Grammy-winning artist, but as a man. "My father was complicated," he said softly. "He didn't talk much, but when he sang, you could hear everything he never said." Those words hit like thunder in the quiet room. People nodded, some crying openly because everyone there understood that sentiment. D'Angelo's music was his voice, his truth, his confession, his way of surviving the weight of the world. The young man continued, sharing stories few had ever heard, how D'Angelo would sit at the piano for hours, lost in melodies that no one else would ever hear, how he'd hum gospel songs late at night when the world got too loud, how, even in pain, he taught his son the meaning of faith. "He told me once," he said, pausing as his voice trembled, "music is the closest thing we have to heaven." At that line, a hush fell so deep that even the air seemed to listen. He then turned to his mother, Angie Stone, and said, "You were his home. Even when he drifted, even when life got hard, you were the peace he was always chasing." Angie covered her face as sobs broke free, and several in the crowd followed. It wasn't just a tribute anymore, it was healing, unfolding right there in real time. The son finished by saying, "My father didn't die empty. He gave the world everything he had, and now, I'll spend the rest of my life carrying his song forward." With that, he stepped back, and the crowd rose to its feet. Applause, mixed with tears, the sound of heartbreak meeting gratitude. Even those who had never met D'Angelo could feel it, his presence, his spirit, his melody, still alive through the son who bore both his name and his purpose. That moment, raw, unguarded, and utterly human, became the emotional heartbeat of the entire service. It was more than a farewell. It was a promise that D'Angelo's light, though dimmed in body, would forever burn in sound. When Angie Stone's son stepped down from the podium, the room didn't erupt into applause right away. It couldn't. There was a silence so profound it felt holy. The only sound was the quiet sniffles of those trying, and failing, to hold back tears. Even the air inside the chapel seemed to pause, heavy with the weight of everything that had just been said. Angie sat motionless for a moment, her hands trembling as she pressed a tissue against her face. Those sitting closest to her later said, she whispered, "He did it. He really did it." It was a mother's pride and a lover's heartbreak colliding in the same breath. For years, she had carried the pain of D'Angelo's distance, his battles, his brilliance, and now, through their son's voice, that pain had finally found peace. All around her, fellow artists and friends wept quietly. Erykah Badu bowed her head, Questlove wiped his eyes with his sleeve. And even seasoned industry veterans, people who'd attended countless farewells, admitted they had never seen anything like it. The speech wasn't rehearsed or polished, it was pure. It was real, and it stripped away the fame, the awards, the headlines, leaving only the human truth beneath the legend. When the band softly began to play Really Love, the same song that had once melted hearts around the world, the atmosphere shifted. People stood, swaying gently, some with their hands raised, others clasping the person beside them. The music felt like a prayer, one last conversation between D'Angelo and the world he had left behind. Angie stood too, holding her son's hand as tears rolled down both their cheeks. The moment transcended grief. It became gratitude. Fans later described it as a wave of healing that swept through the room. One attendee posted online, "It wasn't just sadness, it was release. You could feel the love, the forgiveness, the peace." Even outside the chapel, where speakers broadcasted the service to those who couldn't fit inside, people stood silently, some lighting candles, others whispering prayers. One woman was overheard saying, "He gave us music to feel alive. Today, his son gave him words to rest in peace." By the time the music faded and the lights dimmed, the crowd still hadn't moved. No one wanted to break the spell of that sacred moment. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a collective heartbeat. A shared understanding that what they had witnessed was bigger than a funeral. It was a celebration of spirit, of legacy, and of love that even death couldn't silence. Within hours of the service ending, clips of Angie Stone's son's tribute began spreading online, first among fans, then across every corner of the music world. What started as a quiet, intimate moment in Richmond became a global outpouring of love. The hashtag #Thank You D'Angelo trended across X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Millions of fans posted black and white photos of Angelo with captions like "The soul of a generation" and "You taught us how to feel again." Fellow artists poured their hearts out too. Maxwell shared a tearful post calling D'Angelo the heartbeat of neo-soul, a man who carried both heaven and heartbreak in his voice. Erykah Badu uploaded a short clip from the funeral, writing, "We didn't lose a legend, we gained a spirit." Even Alicia Keys shared an old rehearsal photo of them together, captioned, "Thank you for reminding us that music isn't about fame, it's about truth." But what struck people most wasn't just the tributes from celebrities, it was the emotional reaction of everyday fans. People from every continent shared how D'Angelo's music had carried them through heartbreak, faith, and healing. Some described how Brown Sugar played during their first love. Others said the root helped them survive depression or loss. One viral comment read, "His songs didn't just play in the background, they healed me when I couldn't speak." Even churches, gospel choirs, and radio stations held impromptu memorials. In New Orleans, a brass band played Untitled, "How Does It Feel" as a slow march through the streets, their horns echoing through the night sky. In London, fans gathered in front of a mural of D'Angelo, leaving candles and handwritten letters. In Lagos, DJs hosted all-night tributes celebrating the power of soul. And then there was the moment that broke the internet. A clip of Angie Stone's son wiping his tears, whispering softly, "I'll keep the song alive." That simple promise resonated with millions. The video reached over 30 million views in just 48 hours, flooding timelines with crying emojis, prayer hands, and broken hearts. Music journalists began calling the funeral one of the most powerful goodbyes in music history. Rolling Stone released a headline that read, "When the sun speaks for the soul, legacy lives in blood and sound." NPR aired a segment, describing the tribute as a rare moment where grief and grace became one. But perhaps the most touching response came from the fans who had grown up with him. One woman wrote, "D'Angelo raised a generation of dreamers. His son reminded us that even legends have families, and even the strongest voices fall silent, but their echoes never fade." Around the world, people weren't just mourning D'Angelo, they were rediscovering him. His music returned to the charts, his old interviews resurfaced, and his message about faith, pain, and redemption felt more alive than ever. Through tears, the world celebrated him, not as a fallen star, but as a spirit reborn through sound, love, and legacy. As the world reflected on the loss, what lingered wasn't just D'Angelo's voice, it was the quiet strength of faith, family, and forgiveness that surrounded his goodbye. For years, his life had been painted in shades of genius and struggle. A man torn between the divine gift of music and the heavy burden of being human. But through Angie Stone and their son, his story found peace. Those who truly knew him said that D'Angelo's greatest masterpiece wasn't an album, it was the love he left behind. He had once told a close friend, "Music is what I do, but family is why I do it." And in that moment, at his funeral, when his son spoke, it was as if D'Angelo's purpose had come full circle. The same boy who once sang in a church choir had become the man whose voice built a legacy strong enough to outlive him. For Angie Stone, the moment carried a deeper meaning. She had seen him at his highest and his lowest. She had loved him through brilliance and brokenness. And even after their paths diverged, their bond through music and their son never truly faded. As she watched her child speak for the man she once called her soulmate, she understood something profound, that love never really ends. It just changes form. What began as a duet between two artists had become a symphony of generations. Their son became the embodiment of everything D'Angelo stood for: the purity of soul, the courage to be vulnerable, and the spiritual honesty that defined his art. He didn't just inherit his father's voice, he carried his spirit. In him, you could see both parents, Angie's resilience and D'Angelo's sensitivity, merging into something timeless. Faith was the quiet pulse of it all. D'Angelo had always seen music as a divine calling, and now, even in death, that belief resonated. The church choir that sang him home wasn't performing, they were praying through melody. And when Angie's son whispered, "I'll keep the song alive," it felt like a sacred vow, a promise that the soul of his father's music would never fade into silence. In that reflection, something beautiful happened. The pain of loss began to turn into purpose. The bitterness of goodbye softened into gratitude. And across the world, people began to realize that D'Angelo's story wasn't about fame, mistakes, or even death. It was about redemption, the kind that comes only when art, faith, and love intertwine. Because the truth is, D'Angelo never left. His body may have rested, but his sound, his message, his soul, they continued through those who loved him. Through Angie's strength, through his son's voice, through every note that still plays in someone's heart. He once said, "You can't heal others if you're still bleeding." But now, in peace, his music heals the world, one song, one soul, one legacy at a time. As the final hymn played and the lights inside the chapel began to dim, the air was thick with something far greater than grief. It was reverence. People weren't simply mourning D'Angelo, they were celebrating him. His life had been a melody of triumphs and trials, faith and flaws, but in the end, it was clear that his purpose had never been about perfection, it had always been about truth. The crowd rose to their feet as Angie Stone stood beside her son, both illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight. There were no words left to speak, only the sound of the choir softly singing "Heaven Must Be Like This." Angie closed her eyes, clutching her son's hand. And you could feel it. That peace D'Angelo had spent a lifetime searching for had finally found him. Outside, as people exited into the cool evening air, they lingered near the doors, reluctant to leave. Strangers hugged. Musicians shared quiet nods of understanding. Fans cried softly, whispering his lyrics under their breath. Someone played "Brown Sugar" on a phone, and others joined in singing, smiling through tears. It wasn't just a farewell, it was communion. For those who had followed his journey. From the church pews to the global stage. The message of the day was unmistakable. D'Angelo's story wasn't ending, it was echoing. His voice, his lessons, his light would keep rippling through every soul he had ever touched, through his son's promise, through Angie's strength, and through the countless people who found healing in his music. His spirit would live on, timeless and unbroken. Because some artists don't just create songs, they create sanctuaries. And for millions around the world, D'Angelo was that sanctuary. So when the music faded, and the last candle flickered out, there was no goodbye, only gratitude. Gratitude for the man who taught the world to feel. Gratitude for the mother who shared his gift. Gratitude for the son who now carries the flame. And as the night sky settled over Richmond, one truth remained: D'Angelo may have left the stage, but his soul will forever sing. As the screen fades to black and the final notes of "Really Love" play softly in the background. End your video by speaking directly from the heart, inviting viewers to reflect, remember, and connect. What did you feel when you heard Angie Stone's son speak? Did his words move you the way they moved the world? Which D'Angelo's song still lives in your heart, the one that carried you through love, pain, or healing? Pause briefly, letting the emotions sink in. Then, with warmth and sincerity, continue. Share your thoughts and your memories in the comments below. Because even though D'Angelo's voice has fallen silent, his spirit still sings through all of us. His music wasn't just sound, it was soul, and it will never fade. Now, shift into your closing invitation. Balancing reverence with engagement. If this tribute touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Join us as we continue to honor legends whose music changed lives, whose words still heal hearts. Because some voices never die, they just echo forever.